International Women's Day is a global day set aside to celebrate the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. Marked annually on the 8th of March, the day also marks a call for action for accelerating gender parity. This year's campaign theme, #BreakTheBias, spotlights the individual and collective biases against women that fuel gender inequality. According to International Women's Day's website, whether deliberate or unconscious, bias makes it difficult for women to move ahead. It goes on to state, in quotes, knowing that bias exists isn't enough. Action is needed to level the playing field. Now joining us to discuss this year's theme as we celebrate International Women's Day are Busola Ajibola, Deputy Director, Journalism Program at the Center for Journalism Innovation and Development, and Dolapo Agbede, a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert. Ms Ajibola will also be talking to us about a book that she co-authored titled Gender-Based Violence Reporting Handbook, while Ms Agbede, who is visually impaired, will also be enlightening us on how to leverage digital tools for people with disabilities inclusion in the workplace. Welcome to the show, ladies. Happy International Women's Day. Although today is quite a sober one with all the protests that we've seen all over the country, and rightly so. So it's from that backdrop that I'm going to start. I think I'll start with you, Ms. Agbede, who's with us here in the studio. So today is International Women's Day, and what is this year like for you, 2022 in particular, with the theme Break the Bias, which clearly exists, otherwise there wouldn't be such a theme.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tuno. And let's do the sign, break the bias. What this means, especially the heartbreaking trends over the last few days in Nigeria, is the fact that there's a lot of work to be done. The fantastic bit is that more people are speaking up, showing up. The more he for she's we have is making the conversation more robust. That the needle has to move is absolute. I'm so excited that all this is happening before election year in Nigeria, so we would see tangible change. Women are speaking up, everyone is identifying with us. That makes it amazing in itself. And I also self-identify as a woman with disability, so you can just imagine, we're already, the odds are largely against us as women, then just add the disability factor to it also. It's tough, but it's possible, and that's why we keep on speaking up.
Okay.
Right, thank you so much for that, Dolapo. I'd just like to come to Ms. Ajibola and talk about the worrying trends in society and what we can do about gender-based violence. While speaking about this, I just remember Bamishe this morning. Bamishe had no reason to die. The only crime she committed was to get into a bus to find her way home, just like millions of people do in Lagos every day.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Rufai. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I agree with you that it's important that we really speak about how gender-based violence is affecting women and girls and boys in Nigeria. The kind of incident that we see, which affected Bamishe, it's also similar to what affected Ini Omore, Ochaya, and a host of other women and girls who did absolutely nothing, did not commit any crime other than being women. And, and then it makes me wonder, is it a crime, to be a woman? Is it a crime to be a girl? And that question becomes even more valid with the actions of the legislature. Our legislature, the legislators, a whole, for how many of them, in the month that we celebrate women, where they then voted down all the bills that would have opened up access for women, to enjoy more freedom as human beings, to access political participation, to enjoy equal opportunity as men. It's important that we use this month to reminisce and think of where we want to be. This is not where we should be. We shouldn't have a month where we celebrate women and then what we get is we are pushing women to go on the street. This is not what we want, Rufai.
Okay, let me stay with you, Busola Ajibola. You wrote this book, this handbook on gender-based reporting. That's about our trade, our constituency. What are your major takes in terms of challenges that journalists face in reporting gender-based violence? And what are your major conclusions in terms of the legal regime to address gender-based violence in Nigeria? If you could just take us through that aspect of your handbook.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati. So in 2021, we had conducted a survey on journalists in Nigeria to understand their own perception of gender-based violence. If they are going to be reporting GBV, then we wanted to know, what do they think of GBV? Then it occurred to us from the response that they gave to the survey that a lot of journalists themselves, do not understand what gender-based violence entails. And we see that they agree in their responses that gender-based violence is a very deep-rooted social issue, as deep-rooted as corruption, as insecurity. They also agree that it is important that journalists, and the media do extensive coverage of it. But what we then see is that journalists hardly initiate long-form reportage of GBV. So they only report it, as news break items, and after that, they don't do follow-up stories. We don't know the challenges that survivors encounter when they are trying to access justice processes, whether with the police, whether at the court, even at our hospitals, So it then became apparent for us to raise a very big question. If journalists and the media agree that GBV is a real deep-rooted social issue, why then is the media not investing in thorough and consistent and dogged reportage of that issue? We also realized that a lot of journalists, they confirmed that they weren't as familiar with the ethics that should guide the reportage. So we then gathered, a group of scholars, feminists, technocrats, gender inclusion experts, to compile this. I don't know if the camera can capture it, but to compile this handbook. It's a 287 pages, authored by 15 authors. So it talks about gender-sensitive reporting. What are the ethical principles that you should, abide with as a journalist? How do you prioritize safety of victims? You see that rather than focus on the perpetrator, journalists would, rather victim blame the victim. Sometimes in their language, even when they do not intend, they shame them. So, and thereby they are escalating and perpetrating the violence against women and girls rather than informing the public and policymakers on what we need to do better.
Well, that's really important because of all the dog whistles that were pointed out in that handbook, such as blaming. I'm actually trying to quote what exactly was said in the handbook. Poor parental care and the need for women to get a job for the fact that a job seeker was murdered. I mean, why on earth would you blame somebody for their own misfortune? It's really quite staggering. But I want to come to you now, Dolapo. Talk to us about your area of expertise, diversity, inclusiveness, equity, and why that's important. And also, because we're speaking in the context today of International Women's Day, what is the role of men in this conversation? Clearly not to lead the conversation, clearly. But gender-based violence is often perpetrated by men, so they must be involved. I mean, I say clearly not, because it would be inappropriate. Similar to, I don't know, Black Lives Matter conversations are led by Black people, but obviously involve white people. So can you just address those issues?
Thank you so much, Tunju. So as a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, what I do is to, for every space that is interested in implementing affirmative action, because they need to be interested first, and they want to be intentional about getting good results. We come in, we do a quick audit to see their gaps and help them to put things in place to meet whatever goals they want to have, whether it's having more women in or moving more women out of just the baseline part of the organization up to mainstream, or even with NGOs, they want to work more with women, but they're finding out that they feel like they are not responding appropriately to the kind of interventions that NGO is bringing forward. And then we're like, oh, are you sure that you're even meeting the needs that are actually there? And a lot of research has shown that if we take Nigeria as a case study, that women largely are disadvantaged depending on the situation of the family. you can see decisions like why the girl child will not have education, but her brothers would, for example. And then when the woman is a person with disability, I mean, you're not even supposed to explore your sexuality in any way. That's another example of bias that is there. And a lot of the bias is unconscious though, and people are usually very excited when the women come up and speak up and they want to take a stand and a position based on how much awareness they have themselves, you know, about what could be possible. But very quickly, sometimes when you are pushing the barrier of what is acceptable to your environment, it goes very quickly from the admiration of, oh, this woman is strong and, you know, oh, things are going to get better, to a more, how dare you want to change the narrative. So those are some of the tough aspects of social engineering that we participate very, very actively in. We gather data, we do research, and then we help to share the information in such a way that we get people thinking. We want people to swap bias for curiosity. And the curiosity should not be the morbid curiosity flavor, but rather the one that wants to see society at large get better. And from the context of how do we make sure we're not doing it alone, the men are definitely important. Let's start as women at home, as we bring up our sons, let's make sure that our sons are the men that we would dream of marrying ourselves. You know, there's that part. And then, you know, men, sometimes when you've had the opportunity to work in male-dominated environments like I have had, like I'm an engineer by training, and even with my disability, I still went on 11 more years to work in still that same space. But the reason I thrived in that space was it was a performance rewarding space. There is no doubt absolutely that women tend to shine when equipped on all sides with the right kind of support, and they're given the room to be creative and run. I mean, let's look at what is happening at WTO already. So, you know, with those kind of examples, yes, you still get the side eye when sometimes you try to be firm in trying to get something done, and you get the wisecracks of time of the month, or those kind of things that show up, those sexist things, or when a woman is pregnant and, you know, your male colleagues, and sometimes even the ladies will treat you like you suddenly have this 9 months disease. These are some of the things that that sometimes consciously, largely unconsciously pop up. The men, he for she's everywhere. It also means that when a woman is taking a stand, we're still very cultural, and we know what our culture is like. It's very important for the men to lend voice when a woman is taking a position and stand with the women. More and more it is happening. We heard that some of at the assemblies, that the rallies and the protests that are happening, we're hearing that leaders, men, are coming out to stand with the women. We need to see more of that happening. But again, beyond them standing publicly and doing nothing privately, we need to really, really make sure both in front of cameras and behind cameras, the support is tangible enough to make a difference.
And that's very strong. Thank you so much for that, Dolapo. Ms Ajibola, I'll come to you. Great piece you have put together, about 15 authors, you said, worked on that material. This should be in the hand of every journalist, is it? And if it's not,
absolutely,
why is that the case?
Yes. So today we're unveiling the handbook at Sheraton Hotel, Ladikwali Conference Center, and we have uploaded the online version of this handbook on the Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development website. So it is free, which means that anyone, not even journalists alone, CSO workers, policy makers, anyone who wants to access it would be able to download it. But beyond that, from tomorrow, we are going to be dispatching copies of this handbook to every newsroom in West Africa, not just in Nigeria. We would share the link to the online version to every newsroom. Beyond that, we are also going to use this handbook to engage journalists as much as we can. We have started last year. We trained about 21 journalists from 17 media organizations across Nigeria on how to sensitively report gender-based violence. We have also started engaging editorial teams of media organizations again, on gender-sensitive reporting and how to mainstream, how to tell stories in a more inclusive manner, to broaden the understanding that when we're talking about gender, we are discussing developmental issue. And gender is not just women. Gender is men, gender is women, it is girls, it is boys. It is also to broaden the understanding that we are only emphasizing on women and girls, because when you put on the scale how, GBV affects men and women, we all know that the scale will tilt to a side, and that is, women and girls, apparently. So we are not going to rest until we are sure that every journalist have access to the handbook and every news organization can make use of it in their gatekeeping processes.
Okay, Busola, just before you go, I like the point that you said about how this is not just about women, and the handbook is about gender-based violence. Because, look, there's intersectionality in this matter. There are men who are beaten daily by their wives. There are men who are victims of domestic violence. But, in the conversation, we usually don't focus on the men who are suffering quietly. We focus more on domestic violence, targeting the girl child, targeting the man. To what extent does this handbook give us information about gender-based violence and the man as victim? Because today is International Women's Day, fine, but we must get the balance right.
Yeah, so of course, while I don't think there's any chapter of the GBV that specifically talks about gender-based violence as it affects men, but in the statistics that we had presented in these opening chapters of the book, we had enumerated how GBV can affect men, women, boys and girls. And when we engage journalists, we tell them that if we are trying to combat or eliminate gender-based violence against women and girls, we need to focus on the men. We need to focus even more on the boys, because apart from the fact that boys too are now beginning to fall victim of rape, of sodomization and all of that, if we are not equipping our boys, we are going to end up raising a population of women who are so powerfully empowered, and then we would have a generation or a population of men that we did not train, who perhaps then can also become angry and become to react to the independence of those women in a violent manner. So it is important that we are moving on two legs. We are not leaving anyone behind. So I hope that responds to your question, Dr. Abati.
Well, I guess so too.
Well, I think the conversation is about women because women are the more marginalized group, and it doesn't necessarily mean that concentrating just for one day on the travails of certain women, many women actually, 1 in 4 apparently is the statistics, does not mean condoning the violence done. It's not a competition.
Well, you have heard about violent women too.
Of course.
Who
but
victimize their husbands.
Of course, but it's...
Who terrorize them.
So talking about one branch doesn't mean condoning the other. Of course, that's not to be condoned at all. It's completely unacceptable. Yes. But I'd like your take specifically on the cause of the outrage that a lot of women are expressing today, either by protesting physically, online, in any way, about the National Assembly and their betrayal of the women of Nigeria by rejecting all the women-friendly bills, clearly some kind of policy on their part. Dolapo?
Oh, thank you, Tudun. Why won't we be outraged? I mean, what year are we in? It's 2022. The expectation is so high from the people who are representing us in the Senate. I speak to something you said, which was said that we don't need to possibly have more seats. No, but we need more representation. Yes. And I mean, it's the smart thing to do. The trends, the statistics already say that the women are more, albeit by a small margin than the men. It's still debatable. Then how are we not in the places that matter to take the decisions that will make our entire country better? I am so sure, and every woman that is out on the street, and every woman that is listening, everyone who is collectively outraged by the situation we find ourselves right now, we manage the homes. De facto, they turn to us and we run homes. So why can't we bring those project management, risk management, forecasting, visionary skills that we have based from running the home? Let's bring it out to reshape our society. The stereotypes needs to shift. We're asking for equity. And equity just means that the best fit for the job should be put in the best slot to bring out the best result for the collective good.
Thank you.
Very powerful. I'd like to come to you, Ms Ajibola. Apart from getting this in the hands of journalists across West Africa, another part about gender-based violence, and albeit this morning against women, because it's National Women's Day, is the fact that we don't engage enough. And I mean engagement. We don't engage with the, can I use the platforms for socialization, which culture plays a very great role. So how much work are you doing with engaging with religious leaders, for instance? With religious leaders, for instance, with traditional rulers, for instance, how can we get them to get the message, and in turn they can start to, share with other people in their community the need to change culture, because culture is really important. Culture is a group, it's a way of life of a group of people, and it's been tested over the years. So how can we, but the good thing about culture is we can also change culture. So how can we change that culture? How can we engage more with those important stakeholders as regards molding our culture and society here? I'll come to you, Dolapo, on that. And also, if your mic, you can hear me properly, Mr. Ajibola, you too can also answer that question. I'll come to you, Dolapo, on that first.
So anyone who's in any sort of leadership is in a position of trust. Let's start with that. You are entrusted to make sure that whatever responsibilities are in your hands, you make sure that it comes to it's always about the common good, So the people who hold the pillars of culture in our environment cannot deny the fact that things need to change. And if we speak to the religious leaders themselves, I mean, go into any well-oiled, smoothly running space, you'll find out that a lot of what makes that happen are women. I think the men need to get comfortable with the fact that there is no competition. It's just about equity. Let everyone bring their best selves to whatever it is they can do, to their best talent, so that in the end, it's all for the good of everyone. No one should be marginalized or dehumanized. You don't need to put anyone down to feel more powerful. We can all be powerful together.
Mr. Ajibola, you want to answer the question, if you heard it?
Rufai, I was disconnected for a while, so I don't know if you mind taking the question
with
again.
Cultural bodies, like religious leaders, traditional rulers and the likes, people that hold that level of influence as regards culture and society.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I think it's high time, indeed, that we engage not just our religious leader, our traditional rulers, our legislators, people in leadership position, to understand that, so gender are different. I mean, there's a reason why I'm a woman, and there's a reason why Rufai is a man. And, I think our biological functions also dictates the kind of role that we both play in the society. Now, we're going to be running a very negative slippery slope if we're excluding half of the population from decision making about issues that affect them. So we need everybody to get on board to understand that, if we're going to find solutions to the problem that assail us as a nation, as a country, it is important that we bring representation of half of the population, which are men, and half of the population, which are women, so that we all, bring our lived experiences to the table. That way, the solutions and the policies that we come up with are more enriched, reflect our realities more. And I really hope that we don't see this like a competition it's not a competition. It is a conversation, and we all must feel comfortable to have that conversation so that we attain an equitable society as we would all want to see.
Okay, to both of you, I mean, on this occasion of International Women's Day, who are those Nigerian women that you think we should be celebrating, given their example, their achievements, their distinction? Let me start with you first, Busola. Who are your heroes, the diamonds, that you think should be sources of inspiration for the younger generation? And after that, Dolapo, you can also tell us who your preferences are.
So in my mind, I think every woman, every girl in Nigeria deserves to be celebrated. I mean, because everybody has a potential in them, and we have seen from what we know that if given the chance, every woman, every girl will thrive. But well, if we're then looking for people at least to inspire younger generation, so there's the like of Okonjo Iweala, who is doing amazing stuff at WTO. We have Obi Ezekwesili, who of time and time over again has proven what women can do. I particularly like Aisha Yusufu for the courage that she stands for. I will celebrate women like Bukola, I can't remember her surname now. She leaves education for vaccine, and where she has done tremendous stuff in building capacity of young women. There's the former, I can't remember her name now, the former, the chairman of First Bank, I think Mrs. Awoshika, a host of them, that have done amazing stuff, that proves to us that if we invest in women, in girls, that we can build a stronger and more formidable nation.
Okay, Dolapo?
I celebrate my daughter, by the way.
I like
today,
that. I like that.
Women's Day. Mukwelola, yes.
I like that.
So for me, building on what Busola has already said, there are women who have intentionally put together organizations to empower other women to show up and climb up, like Mrs. Amina Oyabola of Whisker, the founders of the Wimbis community. There's Lois Outer, who is the president of Network of Disabled Women and doing amazing things. Every woman out there is my hero. She is. And all we have to just continue to do is to continue to speak up and swap and engage, remove bias for curiosity, and just be ready to have the kind of conversations that will make the difference. Let's continue to break the bias.
All right, that's really sweet. I wanted to ask you, you cited some examples of existing organizations and services, but what gaps do you see? I mean, especially for you, if it was entirely up to you in an ideal world, what other services should be provided now to really ensure gender parity, and from your perspective as a person living with disability as well?
First things first, we should be allowed options. Nobody should say that because of your situation, life has happened to you because of your situation, these are the only, you are limited to these options. No. The world is already a global village. With the kind of access we have through technology via the internet, we begin to see roles that we did not know could be possible, that are now possible today. So if a young lady should decide that she wants to be a blockchain architect, and she's visually impaired, everybody should not burst into laughter and say, you too, how dare you aspire to such. We have their wheelchair modeling opportunities. And when you get dressed and you leave your native environment going to go and pursue your dream, nobody should ever say that thing of, no, not type they do look for there. At the security, at the entrance, when you approach any business, any organization, whether you want to come there as a client or as a service provider yourself, right from out there, from the security, they should be cordial and everyone should be respectful. Respect, empathy, permission to thrive, without shooting down someone's enthusiastic dream. The same way a child, when you ask them when they're really young, What do you want to be? That same enthusiasm, when you see it come out of a woman or a person that you feel is unlikely to fit, encourage them. Where they want tools to put into their hands, recommend them, sponsor them, help them. Everything is possible, especially when the person involved in it is willing to do the work. Women are ready to do the work. We're ready to take our place. We're not just asking for this to be handed to us. We're asking for a fair chance to participate and make our collective spaces better for all of us.
Well, very well put. Dolapo Agbede, thank you very much for joining us. And Busola Ajibola, thank you also for joining us from the Abuja studio. Thank you very much. All women out there, we wish you a very happy International Women's Day, and we hope that indeed the bias will be broken, whether it's discrimination bias or political bias. Thank you, everyone.